common knowledge now at this point that the E46 has an Achilles heel that is the subframe. The subframe is bolted to what's known as the rear axle carrier panel at 4 main points. So when the car comes in, or if you're doing this yourself, what you need to look for, this is the back left subframe mounting point. And what we're looking for is around the rear axle carrier panel. Over years, you'll get cracks here. You can see this one has a reinforcement plate that's stitch welded all the way around the mounting point. So we check this looks good. The bushings look healthy. This is usually the first one to go, just because of the way the torque is delivered in the car. And then the second most prone one is actually up front on the passenger side. So again, you look at the 4 subframe mounting points. That one looks good. This one is the passenger side rear, no cracks. It's got a stitched reinforcement plate. Mind you, to get a full comprehensive understanding, you should lower the subframe a couple inches because there could be cracks hiding underneath it. And there's one more piece I have for you that a lot of people actually miss. So this seam right here, this is actually where the factory stitch welds, spot welds, the rear axle carrier panel to this portion. This whole seam will separate and it'll just look like dirt. But in reality, this is 2 thin metal panels that are welded together and you'll get a hairline crack all the way around it. So the repair is removal of the whole subframe, put subframe reinforcements on and weld it, but you'd also want to remove this wheel, and I would recommend stitch welding the whole inside of the axle fender liners. It's something you can get a good eyeball on to get a good idea, but to be super thorough, I recommend lowering the subframe. But just remember, you're looking at 4 major subframe mounting points and the surroundings of where that mounts to the rear axle carrier panel. It's good to check it as much as possible. If it's not reinforced, reinforce it. And yeah, you'll be in a good spot. That's something you should always check on the E46s. There was a bogus recall from BMW a long time ago to Band-Aid, and what they were doing was like cutting into the top and injecting a foam that would expand and fill the negative spots. That was not a good long-term fix. And if you did the foam, what we found is that over years, they did the foam as a Band-Aid, and then they came back cracked many years later, and then you couldn't do the welding to replace it because the foam was flammable. So when you get in there and start welding, the foam on the inside starts to smoke and it's a fire hazard. So the cars that got the foam injection were kind of like a wash after that. You had to like get in there and scrape it out or just call it a loss. So the foam technique is a no-go. It is just straight up metal work. You need to get in there, clean, degrease the surface, get the dirt off, even with like, not isopropyl alcohol, but clean it as best possible, metal work. And then get in there and weld it all up, put the subframe back. That's the time to do the diff bushings, which is something I didn't talk about, but if the diff bushings fail, which is right here, you get play in the diff, and if that thing weighs 100-something pounds, you have the diff that's rattling around like this. Every time you hit the gas, the diff just goes ka-clunk, ka-clunk. And over time, the failed diff bushings will get the diff to move, and the diff will rip the subframe, and it is a snowball effect. So to summarize it, keep the bushings healthy, inspect the subframe. If it's not welded, weld it, or just drive it very gingerly. But we can fix it. It's nothing that can't be fixed. There's been a lot of shops that have been doing this for a long time and have it down to a science and can turn and burn. You know, if you do it at a good shop, I don't think you're gonna get it anywhere less than $2,000, but it's also up to you and how thorough you go. Like, you could have a cracked subframe and totally good bushings. That would be significantly cheaper as opposed to bad bushings and a bad subframe. But just remember, it's a time when the subframe's out to do the diff bushings, the subframe bushings, the trailing arm bushings. And the more I talk, the more I realize I forget. The next thing that goes, these rear trailing arms go into a pocket right here, okay? Where this pocket meets the frame of the car, it's actually been known to crack in the pocket of the rear trailing arm bushing. So again, make sure this bushing is good, but this is also another point you should check. This has welded reinforcements around the rear trailing arm pockets as well. So make sure the bushings are good. Always check the subframe. Get it welded and reinforced. A lot of the SMGs were guilty too, you know, because they were really harsh, and when you have a harsh shift, the diff just goes kabloom, and then that encouraged a premature failure. So I personally notice it on a lot of abused cars, more so on SMG cars, just because you can't feather the clutch and initiate like a gentle takeoff. You know, it's kind of rough with the SMG. You could have a pristine E46 M3 and never track it, and it will still happen. You know, it's just an Achilles heel. It's just one of those things. But the education is there, the tools are there. You just need to be diligent. And even if it's not your concern, we know about it. I'm going to check it. Every car that comes in here, it's a point of pride of mine. I'm not a technician here, but I'm really involved, and I like to get up under here and make sure everything's good. So whether you're worried about it or not, we know about it, and I'll check it. I got you covered. It is the subframe. So within the subframe, you have the differential, the upper, lower trailing arms, the sway bar. But once the subframe is dropped, really what you're looking at is a cracked rear axle carrier panel, which is still available from BMW. So there are cars that get super bad, and if it was beyond repair, you can like plasma cut or drill out all the rivets and remove the whole rear axle carrier panel and then put in a brand new rear axle carrier panel, stitch it all together, and it'll be a fresh start. That is the most thorough way to do it, but the parts are still available because they're still breaking.